for attending. So we've got people. It's great to see a lot of people joining us today. Actually, we've got people from all across Europe, from Asia as well, in Singapore and in China joining us. So we've got a great global delegation of WFA members. So thank you very much for joining us today. So today's topic is an interesting one. It's something that has been talked about before in our Insight Forum meetings, and it's around the topic of managing online communities. It's something, as I said, that a lot of members have expressed an interest in from the various networks and communities that we look after within WFA. So we're hoping that today's going to be very insightful for you guys, and you're going to get a lot out of the topic and the themes that we cover. So thanks for joining us. So we're in partnership today with CSpace, and CSpace are going to be introducing themselves very, very shortly. But before we pass over to those guys, just by way of some quick introductions, I think many of you will know me. I'm Steve from WFA, and there's Natalia on the right-hand side of that slide. And so Natalia's going to be helping answer some of your questions and just help you pose some of those to our colleagues from CSpace. So Charlotte and Laurent are joining us from London, and we're going to hand over to those guys in a second. Just by way of webinar administration, if you want to ask questions, we very much welcome that, of course. And in the bottom of your the bottom right of your webinar window, you'll see a Q&A box. Inside there, if you can just ask your questions, we'll take those and we'll pose those to CSpace at the end of today's session. So we'll have around about 45 minutes of content. We'll try and get this finished before the close of the hour, because I'm sure many of you have got other things to move on to. So we'll try and get this done in 45 minutes or so. If there are any other questions or any additional comments that we don't get around to addressing, then we'll try and respond to those via email following today's session. So that's how it's going to look. I think we're going to try and get started with some of the content now. It's my duty to just recommend or just highlight one item that we've got lined up just after the summer in Singapore. We're doing the first meeting of our Insight Forum for market research and consumer insights people in Asia, and that meeting is on the 28th of September. It's going to be hosted by our friends at Abbott, and we've got some great sessions lined up during that. I won't go through the entire agenda now, but we're looking at our future of insights research. We're looking at how to get actionable insights, and how to truly leverage insights for marketing stakeholders. We're looking at again online communities, and CSpace will be talking at that meeting. And then we're looking at ethnography and other types of behavioral research in Asia Pacific. So some really interesting sessions. We've already got I think it's around about 10 or 12 members signed up for that. We're aiming to get around about 20 to 25 market research directors attending that. So if you or your colleagues know anyone who would like to come to that, it's our first inaugural meeting of the Insight Forum in Singapore. We'd be delighted to have you guys along for that meeting.
Today. So Charlotte, who's actually just joined us and is Business Development Director at CSpace, and she helped write the report, and I'm working in her team as a consultant.
Okay, so this is just to give you a bit of context as to who CSpace is. So we have offices all over the world, with our main hub being in London, which looks after all of EMEA, in Shanghai, which looks after APAC, and in Boston, where our head office is. And we've been doing online communities for the past 15 years. First in Boston as part of CommuniSpace, but also in London as Promise, where we were the name of the original agency in London. And actually, over those 15 years, we've developed a lot of insight as to what works and what doesn't work. And we actually felt that it would be worthwhile taking, at this point in time, undertaking a study with experienced client practitioners, so clients who had had one or two different online communities experiences, and to get their view on what they felt worked or didn't work, and then also to work with them to develop what online communities could develop into in the future. And Customer Insight is the, I guess, the synthesis and analysis of all of that work that we did. So what did we do exactly? Well, first of all, we spoke to 20 experienced client practitioners, and this really was across quite a range of different industries. So, you know, we spoke to the Passport Office, so government. We spoke to New Look, Virgin Atlantic, Football Association, McDonald's, L'Oreal, Bidvest 3663, which is a kind of B2B food service provider. So, I mean, quite a range of different industries and clients. We then invited a few of them to come to a co-creation workshop where we could draw on some of the key themes of the frustrations around online communities and try and think about where could they develop in the future and how could we overcome some of these challenges. And then the third part was a survey that we sent out in collaboration with the MRS, our partner on this, to 100 experienced marketing and insight practitioners to try and validate some of the key themes that we'd unearthed through the study. So it was quite a comprehensive study. It took us probably about a year to do. And as you can see, these are the contents of what we cover in the book. So looking at the online communities today, drawing out the insight professional's view on what the benefits are, 4 common community pitfalls, what to look for in an agency partner, challenges that will shape the future, opportunities for the future, where next, and then it's kind of bringing this all together with the kind of final chapter, which is called Bring the Customer Inside. And, you know, for the purpose of this discussion, we're really just going to focus on the first 3, and we're just going to draw out some of the key things from it to give you a bit of a flavor of some of the content of the report. So the first one talks about online communities today. Now, if you type in online communities into Google, you're going to get about 1 billion results. And to be honest, most major growing tech brands at the moment think about their customer base as their community. So I think that's probably why when we talk about online communities, it's worth just being a bit tighter and certainly starting to be tighter with definitions. So when we talk about online communities, we're really talking about online communities which are used for customer insight or marketing purposes. And we thought we'd check a little bit in the room because we're not quite sure what the relative level of experience is with online communities. So we have a quick poll for you guys to complete, just to give us a little bit of a sense of people's kind of relative experience.
I'll jump in now, Charlotte. So you guys should be able to see that poll on your screens if you can vote on that now. So what level of experience do you have with managing online communities? Is it something that you do all the time? You've had a bit of experience, but you're not an expert. That's why you're here, so to learn more about how to do this. Or do you have absolutely no idea what we're talking about? Hopefully not the last one. It looks like we've got getting a few responses coming back in now. So I would anticipate, given the brands that we've got here, and obviously as we've got a lot of members of our Insight Forum, that I'd anticipate that people have got some experience with this, but are perhaps not absolute experts. So I think we can share those results back with everybody now. So as you'll see, a lot of people have got a bit of experience here, but still plenty more to perhaps find out about, which is probably good news for you guys, Charlotte and Lauren, because it shows that a lot of people have got appetite to learn more.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, thank you for running that. So I think the first thing we just wanted to say is, the people that you can get on this community is incredibly varied. So this is just a few of our different ongoing clients. And just to draw out the different audiences, for Tesco, we have Tesco shoppers, so that might be fairly easy. But we have a separate community with Tesco frontline employees who don't really have access to with them. We have high for Zurich. We have expats. For Samsung, prosumers or early adopters of technology. For Vive, we've got patients with HIV in the Deep South. And for Land Rover, we've got their early adopters of their new models, as well as very high net worth individuals. So, I've only taken a few without too much of a view on who would be joining, but what I would say is that in the last 15 years, we've probably engaged with most different types of audiences and certainly a hell of a lot of different markets. The question is, thinking about, if you do have a specific audience, thinking carefully about how you want to engage them in this online space. And that's, I think Laurent is going to touch a little bit on that later. Sorry, I just scrolled through too fast. So these are the key reasons why you might use an online community. So I guess if I go down on the left-hand side first, classic qualitative insight. But actually a bit more than that, because it's on an ongoing, longitudinal basis. So you're having a conversation that's not at a point in time, but it's over months and months, and the vast majority of our communities are 12 months or more. Then it can help you with early warning signs or trend spotting, things that are bubbling up. So if people within the community are having discussions amongst themselves, then suddenly you can start to analyze those discussions and unearth early themes or discussions. Play and experimentation. So because you've built and established a relationship with these people, you can suddenly start to ask them to do more challenging tasks like deprivation study or forced consumption study or phone swap study. So, you can be quite creative with the tasks that you set because you've established a good relationship with people on this space. When you have an engaged community, it can be incredibly fast. So that can be very helpful for quick decision making. You can get advice straight from the customer. So bringing that much closer into the business. And we've certainly had experiences of getting senior people interacting directly with people via video chats on the community in a kind of facilitated forum. It can be a lab-like development for products of new services. So we've certainly used our communities to support agile work processes. It can help you explore new markets, so bringing in new people into a space and actually trying to establish whether you want to explore that market further. And then it can be, of course, an ongoing window into customers' lives, and you can bring a lot of that input and share that across the business so that you're making the customer feel a lot more real. Then, depending on the purpose of your community, you can really tailor it. So this is just some of the different levers that you can play around with, but it's worth bearing in mind what the relative advantage or disadvantage is of each of these decisions that you might make. So, for instance, first we talk about who's on it. So are you talking to consumers or B2B audience, so professionals? And that's going to dictate things like the type of person that you have facilitating this kind of community. I mean, as an example, we've got an account with Elsevier, which is a publishing company but does academic journals. And so we have a lot of scientists and academics on this platform. So you need to have someone who's facilitating those kind of discussions that is capable of engaging with the kind of intellectual content that this audience would be used to. Next, how is the invitation? So is this closed, private, password protected, invitation only? The benefit of that is that it feels more exclusive and you can hopefully share more about your business challenge to this audience. But equally, you might say, actually, we want this open and we want to get, crowdsource people's ideas, like a kind of My Starbucks idea community. Then you have size, thinking about, do you want this to be small and intimate, and that's great for deep qualitative exploration work. And we would say small is probably between 50 to 500. Then large, clients often want a sense of scale behind some of the kind of qualitative insight that we might find. And so therefore they would want to have that kind of scale. And I guess we'll touch a little bit on that later about some of the dangers of trying to get a kind of qual and quant solution 2 in 1. Then duration. So as I mentioned earlier, the majority of our communities are ongoing, and that's because that's where our clients get the best return on their investment, because the upfront cost is spread over the year, but equally because over time people's contributions are much more considered, and you allow yourself the time to really embed this as a way of thinking and working in your business. But short term, if you're looking about a new audience or a new market that you're not sure that you really want to invest in, or it's solving a particular business challenge that isn't relevant in the longer term, then of course you can do this in the short term too. Then the face of the community, is it branded? So will people know that they are working for Tesco and helping Tesco solve some of their biggest challenges? Or would you like to keep it unbranded, and therefore, you remove any natural assumptions, particularly if you're doing brand work and you want to explore perceptions of your brand versus competitor brands, you may want to keep it unbranded. And what we found we can do is you can do a little bit of both. So you could unbrand it for the beginning and then reveal. And we've actually found that's quite an interesting model for engagement. Then what's the model of your community? So what's the structure? What's the relationship that you want with your agency? Do you want your agency to run it completely, and therefore they do all of the heavy lifting and they're engaging on a daily basis with people on this community? Or would you like to actually do self-serve, where you launch your own discussions, you moderate them, you do all the analysis? And typically our communities are fully run by ourselves, but we have certain self-service elements for clients who want that. And then interaction. So typically we will always allow for collaboration and conversation between users, because we find that really is a great source of insight, but also it allows for the community to feel like a community for the customers within it. And if it becomes quite a naturally occurring community, that's going to have an implication on the level and depth of conversations that people have amongst members. And of course, you have a window into all of this. But you can also disable that, and you can just say there's one-way interaction between brand and user. And certainly there are a lot of community providers out there who do that. I'm going to go into the second section, but perhaps, if anyone has any immediate questions on what I've just shared, do put it in the Q&A, or we'll continue towards the end, and at the end we will have Q&A as well. So the second section talks about the insight professional's view. So this is what do clients see as being the main benefits or purposes of an online community. Now the first thing they say is, as I alluded to earlier, beware of the common desire for breadth and depth. So the issue is that if you have a community of 2,000 people and you just stick them in one room, the likelihood is that you're not going to get as much depth of insight, and it's certainly not going to feel like a community. So everything that I've said around the bubbling up, naturally occurring conversations, and you being able to analyze that, or getting people to install a cookie on their screen so that we can record their user journey on something, or getting them to annotate and mark up a whole bunch of T's and C's. All of these things that are quite laborious and quite invasive things that we might ask, you can have permission to do that in a small, tight-knit, 300, 400 person community where you've developed a relationship between the members on the community and the facilitators. If you have something of 2,000, you have breadth, but you lose out on some of the depth. So in the report, it goes into a few different structures to overcome this. So I'm not going to dwell on that now. So what are the purposes? Cost-effective global collaboration, so being able to access all different markets in one digital interface. Nimble 24/7 access to customers. Speed is an obvious one, but also really rich and deep qualitative insight from the pure purpose that, we're doing this on a very ongoing basis, and we're going back to people, we're challenging their points. So, you know, it really is a forum that you can get both speed and a lot of depth. And then the ultimate benefit is really developing customer-centric products and services. So being able to input the customer at any point across your product development pipeline and just keep going back to them and involving them in that process. So Laurent is going to take you just through the final section, which talks about the common community pitfalls.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, as Charlotte just mentioned, communities is a great tool, and it will provide insight that is deep. It will allow you to conduct very fast and very quick research, and on the long run, it will turns out to be more cost effective than traditional research. But because it's still such a new thing for a lot of people still, and it's not a very obvious methodology, the people who wrote this report thought it would be a great idea to ask clients for their point of view on, well, the main danger they've encountered on their community journey, as well as giving a few tips on the best way to avoid them, and that's what we're going to cover in this section. So one of the most serious causes of frustration was that communities, when not managed properly, are a huge endeavor. And 76% of the people we interviewed said that communities would become ineffective when they were under-resourced internally. So there's a few things you can do to make the most of it. The first thing is to define clear responsibilities between you and your agency to ensure that there is a seamless process, understanding who will handle the member requests, who will handle the technical side of things, who will handle the day-to-day facilitation. And here there was a very interesting example from a client at TalkTalk who at the early stage of his community journey chose for a sort of like cheaper, a more self-serve solution where the agency would deal with the technical request and he and his team would manage the day-to-day facilitation. But what he realized is that his team ended up spending all their time filling up survey and facilitating the community and not speaking to stakeholders or building recommendations for driving action in the business, which ended up being, and I quote, feeling like a false economy. So thoroughly scoping what you can handle in-house is an important part of the process. The second thing, and that's going to be true of every single provider of online community out there, you need to overestimate the time it will take upfront to launch the community. This setup phase that will take 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the audience you want to talk to, is long and painful. You will take time recruiting people, you will take time designing the platform, and you won't see the value of your investment immediately. But there is a lot of things that you can do in the meanwhile during this setup phase that can help you build very strong foundation for the community, and I'll drip feed some information about what the sort of things that these people think you can do in the rest of the presentation. And finally, it's important that you plan project in advance, because you don't want the community to just become a reactive tool. We've seen a lot of clients who receive brief and wish they have been informed about the brief 6 weeks in advance in order to run the project properly. And by planning more project in advance will allow you to allocate time for more strategic challenges and more strategic project, which will allow you to use the community at its full potential. Now, an engaged community deliver all the benefit that Charlotte mentioned earlier. Because engaged people will react quicker. Engaged people will share more of their life and provide deep insight. And engaged people will go the extra mile for you and feel the sometimes crazy task we ask them to do. So what are the things that you can do to make sure that your community is engaged? Well, first is to develop the right value exchange, and I'll come back on that later. But thinking about an engagement strategy is one of the very useful things you can do at the beginning of the journey during the setup phase. Another thing is that you shouldn't overwork the community, and well, the community will most likely become a very valuable tool in the business. And Richard Bass, who used to be head of Insight, or European Insight at Samsung, said that he now lacks enough capacity as everyone in the business wants to use the community. So it's important that you resist the temptation to ask too much of the members on the community. And we believe that 2 to 3 activities per week is an absolute maximum. And finally, and it's a very key element to have a community engaged, it's important that you provide regular feedback. So here, Professor Nicholas Hinds from the Oslo School of Management conducted a research on online community and co-creation. And basically, he established that the brand who were able to demonstrate that they were listening and who created a feedback loop where they share the impact of the community back to the member was a system that was 6 times more powerful in sustaining engagement and preventing member attrition than the financial incentive alone. And that's what we mean by value exchange, finding the right balance between the experience online, between the financial and extrinsic motivators, and the stuff that will make people tick and participate. And here it's just about literally thinking about the audience. So the experience is obviously making sure that it's seamless and that member requests are handled quickly. But also think about how you think your audience prefer to be engaged on, where they prefer to be engaged on. So for instance, when you have a community of teens, make sure that most of your activities and research is done through a phone. When you're working with mum, make the task very creative. And then when it comes to the intrinsic motivators, of course you can provide like a regular sort of like monthly reward, but you can also think creatively about this. Think about the audience again. So for Twitter, we send people who are like a very switched on millennial users a t-shirt with the name of the community on it to create a sense of belonging. And for affluent audiences, we found out that gifts that they can use with their families were actually more powerful than money that they have plenty of. Finally, the intrinsic motivators, and again, as I mentioned earlier, this is probably the most key element of the value exchange. It's about leveraging what you think your audience stands for, what they want, what they need. So for instance, for Colgate, we have a community of dentists, and we create monthly networking activities. And we found out a few times that dentists who used to go to the same school and lost track actually became like sort of like close again. Or for Ella's Kitchen, we have a community of mum, and here it's very important that again we allocate space for them to share tips, because we know it's important for people to for mum to actually share tips about how they raise and feed the children. So a great example of a system that was implemented very successfully is Orange. So Richard Clarkson, I've used communities for a very long time. He was one of the first users, and what's quite interesting is that some of the members of his community are still helping him and still online. So what's his secret for engagement? And he basically established 3 reasons for success. But again, this is very specific to the audience he's talking to and to the purpose of the community. But the first one is to create a sense of exclusivity. So the community itself used to be called the Pioneers. It's now called Orange Vision. But the idea here is to make the members immediately feel part of something special. And in addition to that, every week Orange releases a technology spotlight, which is an exclusive article about the future piece of technology. The second element is authenticity. And obviously upfront, when you recruit and you invite people, you need to be upfront about the challenge. What do you need the help for? What is the big thing that they're going to help you solve? In this case, discovering unmet needs in telco and co-developing ideas of the futures. But also closing the feedback loop. And What's quite interesting here is that obviously you can't always tell the members of the community, thank you for helping me create a new phone, because you don't create a new phone every day. So what he found was very useful is just to get other stakeholders, more senior stakeholders, to drop a quick note via email, and he would share it on the community. Or why not record a short video on their iPhone and again post it on the community. And we realized that drives a lot of engagement and a lot of enthusiasm online. And finally, what he does that I find really interesting is that he creates a sense of challenge to invoke continued engagement from members. So when he asks a question, he doesn't ask, would you like to be part in a research project? What he does instead is, are you creative enough to design the future of messaging? Again, like lighting up this sense of challenge. And sometimes he creates projects where he asks members to audition to certain activities to create a sense of sort of like competition and make them feel part of something special. Just a very quick point here, and I'll try to be quick. Often people from the research world tell us, well, the problem is that after a while you end up having brand fans which sort of like bias their contribution and the insight, which is kind of true, and this is also why we recommend refreshing the members to ensure that there's always like fresh blood on the community and new ideas and newbies. But it's also important that we keep these people who actually become critical friends, a bit like when someone on the tube that you never know will never tell you you have toothpaste in the corner of your mouth, but your critical friends will. Proving the ROI of research is not a community issue, it's a perennial insight issue. What insight, what work, what research can you link to the success of a product or of a marketing campaign? But because community are very expensive and requires a bit upfront and require a bit more resource, it's even more important to demonstrate the value of the community to the business. So the first thing is to think about what is the strategic purpose of the community. What part of the business is it going to support? And you need to be able to attach it to something very specific and valued in the organization. So Monique Heller from HSBC says that by giving it a purpose, it will give you permission to say no to the wrong kind of brief, which will allow you to prioritize the brief that will have the most impact, which later down the line will allow you to generate more value to the business. Another thing is to plan impact tracking from the start. So don't find yourself in December looking at the 45 project you've conducted online and trying to attach it to a business result, and use this upfront time and the setup phase to sort of like plan a way to track the impact regularly to make it easy. Another thing is to resist the temptation to promote the community and cost saving, because obviously it is a cost saving tool. But if you only promote it on the cost effectiveness, it will appear to the business as just this like cool and nimble stuff that allows you to do research cheaper. But try to demonstrate the positive value and the impact it help you create, not just the money it saved you, so that the business understands and knows how important is it to have the community. Now, what are the creative ways you can have to sort of like regularly track the impact of the community? And here, Gemma Proctor, who is now a research manager at Twitter, and who's extremely focused on the impact of insight, was created the community called Workshop Play at External Media, and she made a very conscious strategic move of building research into the Salesforce CRM system of the business, because one of the key roles of the community was to show to their customers how well they knew their customers, their consumers. Therefore, every new business person who used the inside work from the community in a new business meeting had to log in on Salesforce through very simple drop-down menu what insight they've used and how helpful it was. Which means that at the end of the year, it was very easy for Gemma to prove that the community had bring £6 million to the business in 2014 alone. So again, depending on the purpose of the community, think creatively about the system existing in your business. We know people create a community NPS poll. We know that GLR is using Google Plus to drip feed information and feedback to the whole business. And finally, it's important to make it easy for stakeholders who don't have a lot of time as all of us. And here, Ross Entrobus, who's head of research at the Football Association, developed a very simple and effective process. At the end of every project, he will send to the stakeholders who've commissioned or requested the work to answer 3 questions on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being I don't and 5 being allowed. And the 3 questions were, do you feel you better understand your audience as a result of this research? The second is, this research help you make a business decision? And the third one is, if you invested your own budget in this research, do you feel you got value for money? Which means that at the end of the year, it was very easy for him to say, well, thanks to the community, people really understand their audience better. Thanks to the community, people want to invest more of their money in research. Finally, it's important to think that it's not just only about engaging members online, it's also about engaging the customers, the stakeholders, sorry. So it's important that you think about the community as a brand that you will market internally. So you need to design a brand identity, because we all know that as marketers, the product is only one part of the battle, and that effective branding and messaging will help you spread the story of the community. And you need to have a campaign mindset, and this part resonated particularly with me because before joining CSpace, I used to work in politics in France as a political advisor, and I was a spin doctor for an MP during the 2012 French legislative election. And in the constituency we were running, the local elected representative were key in influencing voters because it was in a rural area. So at the beginning of the campaign, the MP, Hervé Charette, asked me to conduct a quick research on the representative in order to identify what was the best way to engage with them, via phone, via email, and which one of them were the guy who liked to be invited over dinner around 1 or 2 bottles of wines. And basically, it is exactly the same thing with stakeholders. Try to identify early on what is it that they want. How involved do they want to be in the project? Do they want to attend all the research? Do they want to see what the conversation happening online, or do they just want to report? What report do they want? What sort of output do they need? Do they prefer video? Do they prefer animated data? Do they prefer comic book? All these sort of things will help you really target the stakeholders and position both your department and the community as something part of something bigger. A good example of that is Twitter. It's a great story of community branding. It used to be called Bad Signals, and now it's called Twitter Insider. But basically, every collaterals and output coming out of the community had a single brand, which means that everyone in the business knew where it was coming from. And it was such a huge success that now every single market won a community, from Lebanon to Brazil. The way it gets even more interesting is that now the brand, Twitter Insider, expands externally, and Twitter now organizes PR around the Twitter Insider community to demonstrate to the brand partners how close they are from Twitter users, which then turns into bigger sales opportunity for them. As they say, it's a virtuous circle. So now I'm going to hand over back to Charlotte for her to.
So I guess we just wanted to end on, what are the key steps that you need to take to launch your own community. So the first one is immersion. So immersion of the agency partner that you choose to work with into your business. And that is so that they can understand what are the key themes on your mind. What have you tried in the past? What do you already know? So that they can identify amongst the community when members are having discussions around certain topics, they can quickly identify whether something is going to be of interest to you or not. And management interviews is part of, designing a stakeholder engagement map and thinking about what do different people across your team want to really get out of the community. And this can be, cross-functional, across different departments that you want to reach. Then the second point is obviously defining the basics. So who's going to be on this community? What is the way that you're going to work with your agency partner? Are you going to be having weekly status calls? Will you be having quarterly reviews on the health of the community? All of these factors just need to be defined on how you work and how the agency can best support you. The third is to so planning out the project's importance, you protect time for the bigger strategic questions that you need your community to answer, because it will be very good at answering all of the quick, immediate, urgent questions that you and your business will have. But you need to make sure that it can also answer your bigger, broader exploratory questions, because that's where you really get a lot of the benefit from the community at the end of the year when you think to yourself, what have we achieved? Then create a marketing plan. So thinking about, how are we going to launch this in the business, and how are we going to brand it so that people know that work that comes out of this has come from the community, and build a bit of knowledge and fame around it. Then implementation, and of course that's our job. So we take care of the nuts and the bolts and making sure that it launches and it works seamlessly and you have your members on it, and when they arrive they've got a welcome video, and that kind of leads into the warm-up period. So, when members arrive, you can't immediately start asking your questions. Typically what we would like to do is actually spend a little bit of time up front getting members on the community to meet one another and to introduce one another, and engage a little bit with more personal questions before we launch into perhaps some of the business questions that our clients may have. And then finally, do a launch event. So we were often actually suggesting a soft launch initially, doing an initial project on the community, and actually then launching it publicly to the business with a case study to talk about. So people across your business that may not be accustomed to working with online communities can really understand how it works from the beginning of a project to the final project deliverable. So that takes us to the end. I think there are some questions that we can answer. So hold on for a moment. Let me have a look.
I'll just interject at this point, if that's all right. I can go through a couple of these questions and pose them to you. So thank you for that, by the way. I think that's it's a great introduction. I think it's a really sort of clear-cut set of reasons and rationale for getting involved in this. Maybe if we can just move on to one which I suppose a bit more close-ended. In terms of ownership, how does this sort of sit usually internally within companies and the ones that you've worked with? Is it something which is typically for digital marketing, or does it sit within insight teams, innovation teams, maybe some of, for those companies who are perhaps managing social through their PR, for example, what happens in some cases, they may actually involve those teams as well. So absolutely. Just sort of wondering how that sits internally.
Right, absolutely. So typically our communities are used for marketing purposes, and typically within the insight function or the innovation function. So if you have proposition development teams and they are developing new digital products and they've got an agile working development process, they might own the community, and it feeds very much into their kind of their sprints. If it is part of the insight function and actually it's going to serve everyone across the business, the owner of it will be the head of insight for that department. And I just saw a few other questions around, who owns this? So it's typically we would run the community and we would get briefed on projects and we would interrogate those briefs and design the series of questions and tasks that we would set on the community, do all of the analysis and come back to you with recommendations. So in many ways, the online community is the vehicle through which you run how you might run traditional strategic insight or, concept development or innovation projects. It's just the way that we're gathering insight is different, and you as a client have a window into all of the discussions and activities that are happening as they occur.
Great stuff. Let me ask two questions at once, if that's all right. One question through from someone who's, I think, clearly looking at this right now. In terms of, you alluded to it, in terms of freshening up the community, I guess in terms of participants and active users. So first part of the question, do you think it's better to keep adding in new contacts, new participants, or is it better to keep it as stable as possible? And then a second part of the question, in terms of an engagement plan across a year or so, across 12 months, how does that engagement plan look? Do you have different phases to it? Are there points at which you ask for more complicated participation versus slightly more simplistic participation? How do you sort of map out that engagement plan over the course of the year? And I suppose if you're changing up participants, then how do those sort of two things work together?
Sure. So the first question is, should you have a stable base, or should you kind of continue drip feeding in members? So what we would do is start off with the audience that a client wants to reach, and those can be a mix of customers and non-customers, and we would recruit that up front. So you have your full batch of customers on that community, and we do a lot of work to keep them engaged and get them upskilled and get to know the business and get to kind of reflect more on their behavior, and also meet one another within the community, and start to establish a bit of a culture and identity for those members. We wouldn't do recruitment on an ongoing basis, because at this point, without interrogating the question further, I couldn't really see what the point would be. You would, at a 6-month period or at a quarterly period, engage with the client. And if the client would like to reach a different audience, then you can have a discussion about that and say, right, well, should we bring that different audience into the same community, or should we set up a private room for that new audience? But typically, if you want to reach this 300 or 500 set of people, then we will get them up front and we'll just work with them. And then on a quarterly or half-year basis, we'll say, do we still have the same level of people participating? And of course, there'll be a process of getting rid of people if they're not participating properly. So you keep the level of people to high-quality interactions. But yeah, I guess the answer is stable. But if there were a reason to bring in a new audience or a fresh recruit, or you didn't have the volume of people that you wanted, then you would certainly top that up. And then the engagement plan. So I think your question alludes primarily to how do you engage members on the community versus your engagement plan with stakeholders. And I think it's worth saying that those are two important and different elements. So engaging people on the community, typically that will happen from things like, they will have a relationship with the facilitator that will spend a couple of hours, 2 to 3 hours a day on the community, responding to people individually. So they do that on an ongoing basis. Our facilitators know the names of most of the engaged people on the community. They know when they're going on holiday. They can pick out 5 or 10 people on the community. If you say, actually, we want to bring people offline into a live format discussion for group or co-creation or workshop or debrief. So, really, the engagement really starts with the facilitator that is the face of the community and is the person engaging daily with the people on the community. Then you have things like do creative and interesting questions. I mean, if you're bored by the same question that you're launching again and again, then members of the community will also be. So every question, think about how can we frame this in an interesting way? How can we allow people to conduct a certain diary task or activity over a period of time that's going to allow them a deeper level of insight on their own behaviors. And then, doing video briefings. So a lot of our facilitators are incredibly creative with the ways that they brief projects. So I've had one of the facilitators asking members of the community to do a tantrum about all the things they hated about the customer experience for a given brand. And he led by example and did a video of himself having a tantrum and then uploaded it onto the community. So, you know, a lot of it is down to the person, the facilitator, that we spend a lot of time working with and training to engage with different audiences, and the creativity of tasks and activities, and the way that people are briefed. So it's an ongoing thing. It's the way that we interact with people rather than a kind of progression.
Great. Just one final question, because I know time is ticking on and we're a little bit past the hour. In terms of around the world, do you see cultural differences in the way that people use forums, in the way that people engage with those questions, in their responsiveness, in what works in some markets, in some, or you know, not in others? Is there any sort of observations that you've made based on sort of some of those cultural differences that may apply in different regions?
I do have some of those, and I could pick out a few if you like. So the cultural differences would be around appetite for financial rewards. So in certain markets, they're much more driven by the financial rewards than others. Also, there's a question around whether you're doing things in native language versus English language, because of course if you're doing a multi-market community in English language, then we certainly found some of the Asian markets, whilst they might have a good level of English, feel a bit shy of contributing. So actually we have an Indian community at the moment that is both in Hindi and in English. What we find with certain markets is that, you know, again, I guess in China and in India, you need to drill a lot further to get more critical or more, you know,
right,
stronger evaluation, if that makes sense. So I guess what we've started to do in our Indian community is complement some of the online work with actually in-depth interviews, to actually speak to people directly in a more private setting. So I think that the important thing, absolutely, of course, there are going to be cultural differences, but I think the most important thing is really to get someone who's working on that community, who understands the market and who can really interpret and do that kind of understanding of what's going on.
So with that, it leaves me to say thank you very much to Laurent and Charlotte from CSpace. Some great content. Thank you to all of you for attending today, and we'll be in touch and see you all very soon.